Good evening, KPFA, and welcome to this special Unthanksgiving broadcast. I am your host, mikO Tolliver, here with your holiday hijack to be your guide as we journey through the powerful history of the sunrise gatherings held annually on Alcatraz Island to honor Indigenous resistance, resilience, and renewal. Through the voices of longtime activists and organizers Miguel Molina, Bill Means, and Tony Gonzales, we'll explore the origins of these ceremonies, their connection to the Red Power movement, and their enduring significance on Indigenous Peoples Day and Thanksgiving. Since the historic occupation of Alcatraz in 1969, these gatherings have become sacred moments of unity, remembrance, and hope. Through the voices of longtime activists and organizers Bill Means, Miguel Gavilan Molina, Tony Gonzales, and Morningstar Gali, we'll explore the origins of these ceremonies, how they've grown over the decades, and the logistical needs to put on the gatherings and sustain them for the future. They will also share how KPFA's broadcasting of the gatherings have helped to expand the movement. Since the historic occupation of Alcatraz in 1969, these gatherings have become sacred moments of unity, remembrance, and hope. Stay tuned. My first interview is with Bill Means of the Lakota Nation. He tells of the history of the sunrise gathering in its original days. Unthanksgiving holiday hijack. So where history meets the heartbeat of resistance. Bill Means. Go ahead, Bill. Introduce yourself and what your role is as it relates to the sunrise ceremony here at KPFA Radio, please.
Yes, my name is Bill Means, and I'm a Lakota Indian from South Dakota area in the beautiful Black Hills and our sacred homeland. And my role in the Alcatraz has been as one of a supporting role for the behalf of the Bay Area American Indian movement, which at the time when I began working on this was way back in the 60s, when they had, of course, an occupation of Alcatraz. Back in 1968, I had just returned from Vietnam, and I was able to visit Alcatraz during the occupation, just on leave, coming back from, like I said, from overseas. So that's how long I've been associated with this area. And of course, my dad, Walter Means, was one of the original occupiers about 2-3 years before they occupied during the time of, I think it was 68, 69, somewhere in there. He went with a group of elders from the Bay Area, and they only stayed for the day, and then they left. But they wanted to draw attention to the fact that the prison was now becoming surplus property, and according to treaty rights that we have, that surplus Indian land would return to Indian people. And so they were under the belief and under the impression that land still belonged to us, and so they occupied in order to draw attention to the plight of the American Indian, and to show that we too, not only
My
the
second
civil
interview
rights
was with
movement,
Miguel Gavilan Molina and Tony
Chicano
Gonzales.
movement,
They spoke to me about the
other
history of the
movements
sunrise
of the
gathering
country
around
were going
1992
strong.
when Miguel
There was
became part of the
very
organizing team
little,
to bring the broadcast back to the
should
radio
we
station.
say, status quo.
Tony
At
spoke on the
that
history
time.
of the gathering
Everybody
being
was
broadcast on
protesting
KPFA
the
before
war, or
1992 and
protesting
expanding the gathering to help
women's rights, or beginning to
and
bring out
expanding the
their own
gathering to
rights
happen twice a
for
year. Once on Indigenous
the
Peoples Day,
workers in the fields
once on
that were
Indigenous
coming
Peoples Day,
across from
formerly known as Columbus Day,
Mexico, the
and the
migrant
second on
people,
Thanksgiving.
as
He
well
also
as
spoke about the original
Indian
occupation
people
becoming an
were beginning
international
to
movement.
show their strength in the area of fishing
My
rights up in
final
the
interview is
Northwest.
with
They began
Morningstar
to
Gali.
carry on various
My
fishing
final interview is
activities
with Morningstar Gali,
in
one of the main organizers
in
of the
accordance
gathering.
with their
She
treaty
spoke of
rights.
the logistical
So
needs
all
to
this
put on
was
the gathering
happening
twice a
in the
year.
60s, late 60s. So it was a good time to be alive, and a good time that social change was in the air. And so we became part of that
And
movement.
there you have it,
and
folks. The history of the
later
sunrise
on,
gathering
after 68, after the
the
occupation
history of the sunrise
ended,
gathering ceremonies
I think
broadcast
there
from
was
Alcatraz
a young
Island.
man by
I want
the
to say
name of
thank you
Bill
to my guests, Bill
Wapapaw,
Means, Miguel
who was
Gavilan
an
Molina,
Oklahoma
Tony
Indian
Gonzales, and
Kickapoo
Morningstar Gali for allowing
from
me to interview
Oklahoma
them.
who
If you, the audience, want to
started
hear the
the
full
AIM
clips of each
House in
interview,
Oakland,
check out the Best of
California.
KPFA podcasts,
And as a
wherever
part of
you
the
get your podcasts.
activities there of
And thank
teaching
you
the
to the
culture,
KPFA interns
etc.,
who
to
helped
not
to
only
edit this
his
interview
children,
together.
but other kids in
You
the
can always
area,
find more.
he began a school.
You can always find
And
out
then,
more
of
by
course,
visiting
it was the AIM
kpfa.org.
Survival School, they called it.
And you can always
And
find
as
out
a
more
part
by
of their
visiting
activities,
kpfa.org.
they began
My
to
name is mikO Tolliver,
each
and thank
year
you again.
Go to what they call
My name is mikO
National
Tolliver,
Day of
and this has
Mourning,
been your holiday hijack.
in which
My name is mikO Tolliver,
we
and this
were
has been your
mourning the loss of
Unthanksgiving
our
holiday
land
hijack.
and the loss of our treaty rights. And so back in the late 60s, early 70s, Mr. Wapapaw started the Thanksgiving, what we called Unthanksgiving. And we began to promote it as Indigenous Peoples Day, which today ended up, I think it was the mayor of Berkeley, African American, who first declared Berkeley as recognizing Indigenous Peoples Day on October 12th as opposed to Columbus Day. So that's how Alcatraz activities started. There's two of them, of course, the one on Columbus Day, and then there's the one on Thanksgiving, which is National Prayer Day, which we go to there and have a sunrise ceremony. So there's two major events there every year since that time in the early 60s, 70s, I should say. So that's how long I've been associated and going out to the Bay Area. And of course, KPFA has played a major role in this, in that they always broadcasted the activities there, both on Thanksgiving and also on Columbus Day, which is now Indigenous Peoples Day. So this is how the activities began there with the Oakland AIM and continued on by in San Francisco by Antonio Gonzales and his group there in San Fran that continued to go every year, as well as the International Indian Treaty Council was really the big organization behind those two events. After the occupation of Alcatraz, the Treaty Council, International Indian Treaty Council, which I was president of the board at the time, we endorsed those activities and made two annual events. So we've been going there every year, and of course, it's come to quite a cultural event here for especially on Indigenous people's Thanksgiving. And of course, being able to change the holiday from the recognition of Columbus, who was lost, who was desperate, lost on our shores, sick, destitute, and wrapped in rags when we found him. But Columbus, was given all this credit, and the Italian community in San Francisco actually protested against us at one time, saying that it's Columbus Day and they didn't want to change it to Indigenous Peoples Day. So we've had all these various controversies surrounding this day. They marched against us. We marched up there in the northern part of San Francisco, but we kept on every year. And so now it's well accepted, part of the calendar, both Thanksgiving and Indigenous Peoples Day, which used to be Columbus Day.
Yes. Okay. Wow. That was great to know. I didn't know the part about the Italian community coming against you guys. That was kind of halting you, but I guess it makes sense when I really think about it. Okay. Some other questions I have here for you. You mentioned who were some of the early people, like you went there with your dad. Do you know some of the other early leaders who helped to get the sunrise ceremony going?
Yeah, there was Chalk Codier, a guy by the name of, I think his real name was Alan Codier, and his wife Belva, who ended up starting the American Indian Clinic in Oakland. that still exists today, by the way, run by Marty Wakazu, or at least it was in the past. He might have retired by now, but um, so those folks started the Indian Center and the clinic in Oakland, and as a part of their activities, and they continued on with Alcatraz, and we used to have an annual picnic and all kinds of activities, powwows during that time. So those people, the Codier family from Pine Ridge, South Dakota, they were very active, and a guy named Dick McKenzie. And there's another group of church women who also joined into the first occupation of Alcatraz. And a guy he was a Chippewa fella uh, who wrote a book about it actually. And I can't recall the name of the book. Alcatraz is my home, or something like that. And I'm trying to think of his name now, but he was he wrote a book about the first occupation, had some pictures in there, and so from that time on, in the late '60s, and it was a tradition, and so that was primarily the Indian community in Oakland that got behind the Indigenous Peoples Day and Thanksgiving and kept it going, along with later on Bill Wapapaw and then Antonio Gonzales over there in San Francisco. So a lot of those are kind of the main leaders, as well as there was a big Indian center in San Francisco, of course, and they continued some activities. They used to have an art show during that time and all that. Of course, that Indian center no longer exists, but they did celebrate and come down to the Indigenous Peoples Day and a march with us at all times during those years. And so I would give credit also to those folks in San Francisco and Oakland, Berkeley, the whole Bay Area. Actually, the Bay was always responsible and always conscientious about coming to that celebration. It was kind of two annual gatherings, and of course now the Thanksgiving gathering is way larger. But also it's a day, that people talk about giving thanks for all they have, and it's appropriately so that then we would have a prayer ceremony there to have sunrise celebration and prayers, and then we have the Pomo dancers also. I got to mention them too. The Pomo people who took an interest early on in the 60s too, who were part of the occupation. They always provided young people came and danced their traditional dances. So it was the Pomo people also. Can't forget them, that also were very strong in their support for the original activities around Alcatraz.
Great. That's wonderful. Okay, then my next question is, so you mentioned that KPFA does broadcast it. Can you talk more about how KPFA has maybe helped to bring attention to it or grow it or sustain it? Just what is, aside from just broadcasting, what has KPFA also really done to be a part of the ceremony?
Oh, we owe a high debt of gratitude for the solidarity shown by KPFA and all their staff, in which they would get up early in the morning. I can remember them carrying all this equipment, man, onto the ferry boats and loading up early at sunrise or before sunrise and taking the first boat over, and then setting up a remote broadcast right from the rock. I mean, this is not downtown or on the shore, nothing, right at Alcatraz. So it was right on the spot. And I mean, it was beautiful that we had so much, should we say, airtime, so much programming dedicated to what was going on there, because there was Indian people from all over California that, come now, and it has grown through the years. So we owe a debt of gratitude, and of course solidarity. KPFA has always been involved in and social change movements, and they continued right off the bat with uh, one of the movers and shakers, and that, of course, was trying to think of his name now, uh, Gavilan. Uh, he's one of the broadcasters for the radio. He has a show there on KPFA, and he'd even dedicate part of his show during the week to kind of, should we say, announce that Alcatraz was happening, and that was a great beginning, and the solidarity shown by KPFA, their staff, and all the people there that support us, and of course we owe a debt of gratitude to them.
That sounds great. Yes, Gavilan, and I know he was supposed to be here, part of the interview on Friday. He was here and we didn't get you. However, it worked out for the best, because this really allows for us to really, really have some time to hear your experience, and you tell us the history about it. So now I'm curious, could you describe the spiritual and cultural elements that are central to the sunrise ceremony? Like, talk more about what the ceremony is, what it does, what is it really about?
Well, Thanksgiving is a very appropriate time for Indian people or indigenous people to be gathering right in the heart of the bay, for all to see, for all to hear through KPFA, and we were able to carry on that sunrise ceremony to greet the sun, to see the beautiful skyline of San Francisco as the sun rises over the background of the bay and all the beauty of the San Francisco area. And of course, at the same time, we're in prayer, and we're recognizing the youth are there dancing, and people come there and offer prayers to, not publicly, but they walk up and put tobacco into the fire. So everybody has a chance to be a part of the ceremony in a very quiet and humble and spiritual manner, so that we're very respectful. We've never had any kind of an incident there. We've had thousands, average probably 4,000 or 5,000 people there, sometimes, especially on Thanksgiving. That's what's so we say special about this event, is that many people will come from all over California and other parts of Nevada and other Navajo and all over, different residents throughout the West, in which people know that this is happening, and so they travel there, actually take their vacation or take time out of their working day in order to be there to Alcatraz, so they could start the morning off with a prayer and a good sunrise to greet the day. And so we have some songs, spiritual songs, and sometimes we have various performers like Mr. Floyd Westerman, who is a famous singer who used to come there, Buffy St. Marie, some of those folks that came there through the years, occasionally to lend their hand and sing a song or say a prayer or lead us in some kind of ceremony. And so we have the youth there, we have the elders there, we have our whole community turning out. And of course, we gave special attention, to the Ohlone people, who a lot of people don't even know their name, but they're the original owners. They're the people that occupied that Bay Area before the white man came, before Columbus, before the Italians, before any people that wasn't indigenous. And so, a lot of activity has started, and San Francisco is famous for innovation, for solidarity movements, for anti-war, for helping the farm workers, for helping the Indian people, for helping the homeless, all these things. They always take a very strong stand for social change there in the Bay Area. And I think that's another part that brings the people out is they want to show something. They want to do something on behalf of Mother Earth, on behalf of their community, on behalf of their neighborhood. They want to be there. And so just by their presence, they make Alcatraz a success because all these people from all different walks of life, they come there and humble themselves and recognize that we're all in this life together and we need to respect each other. And I think that's one of the things that comes out there the best is how everybody treats each other and we get along and we have a good day and start it off with a prayer and you can't begin the day like any better than that. And so that's one of the themes that really, really comes forward. Oh, then now we go down after Alcatraz. We usually have a little uh, place there. I can't remember the name of the park, but it's not too far offshore. When we get to the shoreland, we can march up to a little park there near the wharf, and they have usually some entertainment. You know, people have uh, some performers come there. We have both youth and adults, and people come. So it's more than just getting off the boat and going home or go eat breakfast. A lot of people go to the second part of it, which is a march and then a solidarity, you know, standing in there listening to some music and things like that in that little park near near Alcatraz. So there's a few activities that take place. We've had conferences during that time, so that when part of the conference is going to Alcatraz, and there's a lot of activities that happen. Oh, and then now there's a powwow in Oakland during that time too. So it's a social gathering, of course, in which people can dance and feel free to be indigenous for a day. And we like that that the community turns out so well at Oakland over there at the park across the bay there, and enjoy the rest of the day with a powwow. So those things are happening too as well, and I'm sure it'll happen again this year. But yeah, we look forward to that long day of activities there. And usually the night before, maybe they have something at the Indian Center in Oakland, or someplace in San Francisco will have a movie or something about Indian people and our struggles with the corporations and the environment and all this stuff. And it turns out to be a real good time for reminding of who the landlords are, who's the original people of this land. It's good to stop and say, oh, wow, this all belonged to indigenous people at one time. And so these are thoughts that come to people's mind as they think of their various favorite poem or favorite story about an Indian or favorite story about their history of where they come from. So anyway, it's a wonderful time to get together because there's so much spirit in the air, good positive energy. So it's San Francisco known for that, and the Bay Area.
Wow, that's so much information, and actually, you what you were talking about was going to tie in right into what I was going to ask you next, which was just how has the sunrise ceremony tied into broader movements for indigenous rights and sovereignty in the U.S. And, would you be able to speak on that?
Yeah, well, I could say that that's one thing beautiful about the Bay Area. It's always kind of like we always say that Alcatraz lit the fire, relit the fire of indigenous people's resistance indigenous people's self-determination, indigenous people's being noticed, being part of history, not being put in the back of the pages of the history books, but up front for one day, we're reminding America of who we are and why we're there and that we still exist, that we have a way of life, that we have a religion, that we have our attachment to the environment, that we love Mother Earth and it's our mother, and we have a different philosophy of life, to consider us all relatives as indigenous people, and to welcome other peoples from all over the world to our land, and say that we're in solidarity with those people as well, whether it's the Palestinians who are suffering every single day over Palestine and other places. It reminds us of our not only solidarity, but our obligation to bring human rights to this world, to recognize that all people have human rights. We're born with that. We're not given human rights. We're born with that, and we have to bring that to the forefront of humanity so that they begin to understand that there could be, and will be, and is possible to have peace in the world, and that we don't have to bomb ourselves into submission or use myself being a veteran. Sometimes I wonder, they always say the inhumanity of man to man, man to this earth, is really most visible in wartime. And of course, that's true, because I witnessed it, and then on TV every night we witness it in Palestine. And it's very, very, very heartbreaking, and brings back the terrible nightmares and dreams that we have followed us back home when we come home. You don't get rid of that stuff. You can't just put it in the back seat or something. So these are things that this movement, this Alcatraz, it's like ripples in the waves of the sea. They're going out every day from San Francisco, from Alcatraz, from that movement that started there. A lot of movements begin there. A lot of solidarity starts there in the Bay. Something about that place that's magical, that's beautiful. So we'll go back there, return there, and pay homage to the people that's still there. And so that's how we build solidarity and create friends and allies throughout the world, is by the understanding that we create many times right there at Alcatraz.
That was really beautiful. That was really beautiful to listen to, and it really touched me. I really felt that. So then I guess probably like my final question then really is, how are you hoping to see the sunrise ceremony progress and move on and grow and evolve for the next generation?
Well, our dream of Alcatraz was always to make that a monument to the resistance of indigenous people. So we'd like to see continue, and we have a good relationship with the Park Service, but we want to expand on that. Eventually, maybe there's a university there, or maybe there's a center of indigenous studies there, or maybe there's a satellite of a university there, or something that can continue to teach the people about the original inhabitants, about the indigenous people, to spread the word of. So that's kind of our dream, is that Alcatraz continues to evolve through the generations, through the young people that take up and say, hey, we could put a art art studio there. We could make a lasting symbol of indigenous peoples' solidarity and resistance to what's going on in the world, and I think that as we move ahead, as we move, we like to spread the word that someday, somehow, these young people are going to come together and they're going to find a place there for Alcatraz to be a permanent home of thought and philosophy, a permanent home of resistance to the exploitation of Mother Earth. So these are things that we see in the future, and we hope that just the everyday solidarity, every year, annual celebrations that go on there will continue so that we keep that fire of resistance lit. We always say that the fire of indigenous people's resistance is relit every year we go there to Alcatraz. We put a little more sticks on the fire and we keep that fire burning for the future generations.
Yes, I agree with you 100% on that. You know what? Actually, I think there is one more question I want to ask you. You are planning to be at the ceremony this year. You're coming out for November, right?
I think so. I hope so.
Okay.
It just depends on my health right now. I got a back issue, so I might be in the hospital then, but hopefully not.
Okay, I'm just curious, what role do you do? What do you do at the ceremony when you're there?
When I'm there, I usually interview with Gavilan, of course, and then I usually either act as a master ceremony sometimes, or I just I'm one of the speakers, or I help organize various activities at some point, sometimes. But I do mainly just organizing around the event.
Okay, great. I think we got it all. Is there anything else you would like to add that you feel maybe I missed? Or so I want to get all the information that you want to share about this amazing ceremony, this amazing day, and just everything to add to our special that we're going to play for it.
I think we covered it all.
That's great. Well, thank you, Bill. I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me.
All right.
And I thank you so much. I'll let Gavilan know, too, that I spoke with you, and he'll be very excited.
All right.
All right. Have a good day. I
Thank
hope your
you.
back feels better, please.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. KPFA Radio is a community-powered, listener-supported radio station based in Berkeley, California. We are able to bring you this content through donations and support from our listeners. Please consider supporting KPFA through a donation by visiting www.kpfa.org/donate. And now let's get back to the program. You're listening to the Unthanksgiving Holiday Hijack. My second interview was with Miguel Gavilan Molina and Tony Gonzales. They spoke to me about the history of the Sunrise Gathering around 1992, when Miguel became part of the organizing team to bring the broadcast back to the radio station. Tony spoke on the history of the gathering being broadcast on KPFA before 1992 and expanding the gathering to happen twice a year, once on Indigenous Peoples Day and Thanksgiving. Tony also spoke about the original occupation becoming an international movement.
This is Miguel Gavilan Molina here at Free Speech Radio KPFA, and we're getting ready for Radio Free Alcatraz. That's been a tradition of this station for the last, I believe, 30 plus years. And back in the 80s, there was a lot of movement around the American Indian movement and the International Indian Treaty Council. And I participated in some of those gatherings. And I believe it was in the early 80s when the American Indian Movement and the International Indian Treaty Council here in Northern California, the Bay Area, under the leadership of Bill Wapapa, um, started, considering uh, to do something with the nations and the Indian communities throughout the Bay Area, Northern California, and the country to look at what was coming up in 1992. So this was like 10 years before. And during that time, I participated in some of the events, but it wasn't until 1990 that Tone Gonzales from the American Indian Movement West said, "Hey, Gavilan, we're going to go out to the Rock, and we're looking at bringing the tradition of the sunrise ceremonies back to the Rock." And one of the things that he asked me was to bring, do you think you can get the radio? Well, the radio, KPFA, was very instrumental when back in 1969, when Richard Oakes and the students and other groups and eventually occupied the Rock, occupied Alcatraz in 1969. And I believe it was Jim Bennett, Tony Romo, and others that were working here as the technical crew at the station KPFA here that went out and they put together a unit for the group there, the native peoples there, to be able to broadcast what was happening because the whole country, was waiting to hear. And again, it was KPFA who built the unit that allowed John Trudell and the other A members to broadcast from the Rock. Well, after the occupation, I believe in 1970, after 18 months, the occupation ended. That was the end of the broadcast. And it was, like I said, in the 1990s that Tone Gonzales invited me to come out. And I did go out with the support of Jim Bennett and others, and Pritap Chatterjee, who was a programmer here and working in the news department. Went out there and we did the first broadcast. And the history prior to that, which is really essential, Tony, you could give us that history with Bill Wapipa, before everything, before 1992.
Well, I'll certainly try, and greetings all my relatives. And, yes, here in the Bay Area, I was living at the AIM House at that time in the early 80s, 81, 82, and like that. And what you were talking about KPFA coming to the island, and you mentioned John Trudell at Radio Free Alcatraz. That was primarily, and has been, for the November annual gathering at Alcatraz. But meeting in October was more recent. It was tactical, it was strategic, and it became a profound historical marking point for indigenous networking, indigenous peoples throughout the Americas, certainly because the Alcatraz for October was planned on October 12th to counter Columbus Day and Columbus Day activities. So there's a little bit of history that even goes to the 500 years of resistance at Alcatraz Island, 1992 of October. And it goes back even to, Indian peoples throughout the Americas were always opposed to even the term of Columbus Day, or the mythological, romantic discovery of the New World by Columbus. People were fed up with that, and but to coordinate an international network, which would be a catalytic moment, actually came about in Geneva, Switzerland, in 1977, at the first international meeting of indigenous peoples throughout the Americas in September. And during that 3 and 4 day meeting, there was a declaration of all the indigenous peoples that were there in Geneva, in 77, a declaration of their independence. And also there was a call to action, a resolution that came out of that General Assembly in Geneva, Switzerland, from the Indians, primarily from the Americas, to counter activities of Christopher Columbus Day. So in 77, that was that call to action that from that day forward, all the Indians of the Americas and around the world who came to that conference would organize counter activities to Columbus Day. And Bill Wapapa was also among those in Geneva, Switzerland at that time who did make that a reality by beginning to come to Alcatraz. But there were also people like that, Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, well-known author and professor here in the Bay Area that we're all familiar with, and many interviews that she's been on KPFA. But Bill Means and was among those, just many. And that also included Nilo Cayuqueo of South America, for example. But I say his name because he'll come back later in my talk. But so from 77 and a call to action that Indians of the Americas from there forward will counter activities went in the making. And so coming back to San Francisco, Bill Wapapa was organizing at Alcatraz beginning in the late 70s, early 80s, and during the time that I was living at the AIM House in Oakland, 81, 82, 83, around there, we are going to Alcatraz for not only November then to honor the warriors who took the island, but now to counter activities of Christopher Columbus. So October 12 was referred to as, from that call to action resolution, Geneva, Switzerland in 77, it was referred to as International Day of Solidarity with Indigenous Peoples of the Americas. That's what it was called. Not yet Indigenous Peoples Day, but International Day of Solidarity with Indigenous Peoples of the Americas. And so people began coming to Alcatraz for October. So it's not just November, but beginning now in October. And I recall going to those, Miguel, to those gatherings on October 12th, and it'd be just a handful of people, 15, 20, maybe 50 people at the most, and it began to grow from there. And also, most importantly, Nilo Cayuqueo, who was at the 77 conference in Geneva, had proposed an encuentro, a gathering of Indian peoples in Quito, Ecuador. And that was in July of 1990. And that is a catalytic moment because after Geneva, Switzerland in 77, the next major intercontinental gathering of Indians was in Quito, Ecuador, 1990. And from the Bay Area, John Curl was among those in the delegation, and he was also sent on that mission by the mayor of that time in Berkeley, Miguel, Lonnie Hancock, I believe her name was.
That's right.
And so from 1990, coming back from Quito, Ecuador, John Curl and others began organizing and what became to us known as Indigenous Peoples Day Powwow in Berkeley in 1992. So there's a history to the gathering at Alcatraz, raising consciousness about 500 years of resistance. And then in 1992, the first Indigenous Peoples Day powwow that was launched there from Berkeley. And today we have over 100 cities across the country and indeed around the world, countries that commemorate Indigenous Peoples Day, October 12th. And I have to say also, during 1990 and into 1992, the United Nations and Spain were in discussions because Spain wanted to present to the world the discovery of the Americas by Christopher Columbus, through Spain. There was a big struggle over that, and they sent 3 ships, replicas, the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, to New York City Harbor, New York City. And people from the Bay Area whom we knew, Lee Sprague was among them, and also a committee member for the Indigenous Peoples Day powwow that was started in Berkeley in '92. But he was there when the planning and the ships, the replicas that were in New York City, and he and others said that that's not going to happen because those ships were planning, Miguel, to come to the West Coast, to San Francisco.
They were going to go around the Cape at the bottom of Tierra del Fuego.
No, they were going to go through the Panama Canal.
That's right.
Yeah, all that. But they were already getting so much flack. And the committee, Columbus Day Committee people in New York City, they ran out of money. They needed to raise millions of dollars to get those ships across over here. It was daunting. It was just too much for them. And the whole idea dissolved. Even the San Francisco committee, who was coordinating with them, dissolved. So that all fell through. So I would say for Bay Area people and across the Americas, North America, it was a victory for us that we defeated Spain from bringing those 3 ships, the infamous ships, replicas, the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria. They were actually planning to bring it through the canal and up to San Francisco, and that went down the tubes. And the United Nations did, though, declare 1992 as Columbus recognizing the Americas, etc., did give Spain that. And indigenous peoples of the world, the United Nations declared 1993 as Indigenous Peoples Day. So, we got the recognition 1993. Spain got the recognition 1992. For their association with Columbus, but that's a part of the activities that it took. It just didn't happen overnight. Even the Indigenous Peoples Day and the powwow that is credited to being a part of, having gone to Alcatraz and that whole awareness, it took a lot of planning. And as I tried to elaborate as best I could the history that goes back to Geneva, Switzerland, 1977, and that call to action to counter Columbus Day activities. So, and there you have it. And today, it's 532 years of Indian resistance to colonization throughout the Americas. So there's a whole shift that launched back in 1992, and that continues forward. Now it's an international Indian movement that is calling for human rights, territorial rights, treaty rights, cultural protecting of sacred sites. I mean, it's a movement now to be reckoned with. And if I can just go a little step further, the indigenous people's participation in the international arena that really sprung from the countering Columbus Day also set the course for international law. International laws are being established now, making room for the rights of indigenous peoples. And it's ironic that we as Indian people are having to work under the legal structures imposed upon us by settler colonial states back then in their making of these laws, but now the laws are beginning to change and adjust, and Indian people have definitely made an impact in the international arena and the rights of Indian people and for the coming generations. And it all, that catalytic time of exploiting Columbus and his history, dark history that he brought upon the Americas, that we took advantage of that, and now we're turning the clock around.
And the one thing that is happening, Don, that I've noticed too, and that's that in the last 30, 40 years, and especially in the last 20, there's been opening consciousness from government officials who are looking at the situation of, global warming and the whole crisis with climate, considering Native American approaches. Native American ways to deal with bringing balance back, to bringing restoration back, to the cleaning of rivers and the toxic and chemicals in the air. There's been efforts and even in this current administration, the Biden administration, for all its faults, it did appoint a Native American woman to be the Secretary, Interior, Secretary of the Interior, which gave probably that position one of the highest positions of a Native person in this country, and her coming into this mix has opened up the Biden administration to consider approaches on how to deal with the earth, how to deal with restoration, how to deal with reviving, areas and lands that have been contaminated.
And those very topics that you're referring to, and Deb Howland, the Secretary of the Department of Interior, taking that leadership and taking on climate change. Indigenous peoples, I have to just go a little bit more history of our involvement at the United Nations. And now this is before it was called the United Nations, when it was called the League of Nations. At the turn of the 19th into the 20th century, there was a chief called a Chief Destaque of the Iroquois Confederacy. I believe he was Cayuga, this chief, on behalf of the Iroquois Confederacy. 1926, he was in Geneva, Switzerland, and wanting to address the League of Nations, and he took his wampum, and the issues that he took, Miguel, was about Mother Earth, the care for all our relatives, including the animal world, the winged, those that swim, those that crawl. He was talking all that, 1926. But indeed, yes, it's galvanizing. In the 11th hour of this planet's existence with us, we're being heard, but at great sacrifice and expense, because these people with knowledge that we're talking about, these defenders, they're being killed, shot on sight in Central South America, even North America, some suspicious killings, but all out, there's several organizations that can count how many indigenous human rights and environmental defenders are being killed, So, whether it's protecting rivers from being dammed, or extractive industries wanting to dig into sacred territory, it comes at a great expense. But there's no stopping Indian peoples from going forward. And as Oren Lyon says, we have to Indianize, 7 billion people. We have to Indianize 7 billion people before it's too late, and for the coming generations. So it's a matter of changing values. Society has to change its values, and it begins with us as individuals, finding that spiritual balance back with nature.
And it's so crucial, particularly at this time. And one of the things that I've noticed, Don, because this is going to be our 34th year of coming out there. And, here, the station, Pacifica, KPFA, Free Speech Radio, has taken this as a tradition, with the native communities. When we gather there on the rock, it is, for spiritual purposes. It is a sunrise ceremony as we welcome the fireball in the sky as the morning star rises, to bring light into the darkness. But after the activity there, which is actually Native American church, without walls, without structure, it's open, and people are always asked to respect that, to not be disruptive. But what happens afterwards, there's a lot of activities, and it's those activities where people gather. Usually on Indigenous Peoples Day, there's up to 1,000 people that come out during what we call the sunrise ceremony on Thanksgiving. There anywhere from 4 to 5 to 7,000 people turn out, and it's after the actual ceremony where people start talking. Conversations about, hey man, this is happening on our reservation. They're trying to extract, lithium. They're trying to extract ore over here. They're trying to extract uranium. I know Mr. Bill Means up in the Lakota Nation, they're fighting because there's attempts to go into the Black Hills to extract gold, to extract, other minerals. And that's something that happens, after the gatherings at Alcatraz, which I have always found not just powerful, but enriching, and it galvanizes, as you said. It affirms our allies and communities across the country to take action against these assaults of raping Mother Earth.
And the direction when we go to Alcatraz, both October and November, it's spiritual and guided by the principles and the legacy that we've inherited from American Indian movement and leadership like Bill Wapapaw and Agnes Lamont and Floyd Red Crow, Westerman, to continue the struggle. So in those moments, they're spiritual moments, and the American Indian movement is a spiritual movement, and that's the direction we try to provide. Finding peace within ourselves and engaging each other by what those issues are, and connecting, reinforcing, as you say. Those are very good moments to come together, but it's all as a spiritual movement. And even November and October, there has been some slight changes, Miguel. Whereas, if I may say, we used to take, because there's a lot of sun dancers and other ceremonial peoples that come to the island both October, November, and we used to take the chanupa, we used to take the pipe, the sacred pipe, as you might recall, there, and we would ask people to be in their best conduct, and women in particular, if they're on their moon, for example, to not come near the circle or close to where the ceremonies are. But the public started coming, and arriving at Alcatraz both October and November started getting bigger. Like you were saying, October is now 1,000, 1,500 people, 4,000 or 5,000 come in November. It's hard to control the conduct and the respectfulness that the people aren't aware of. So we don't take the pipe, the sacred pipe, to the island anymore. But we do have ceremonies and prayer and try to keep to traditional ways on how these ceremonies are to be conducted, because it's a guide for us for the future and for the coming generations. And I just want to say, Miguel, and to our listeners, you can go to Alcatraz Monday, October 14, and the first boat's going to be leaving at 4:30 in the morning. You can go to the International Indian Treaty Council website for more information. Go to iitc.org, or try to plug into the boats themselves that are chartered. And this would be Alcatraz Cruises. And when you go there, look up events and Indigenous Peoples Day, Alcatraz, for Monday, October 14. There still might be tickets available. I'm sure there will be.
And that's the Hornblower Alcatraz fleet. That's
Well, it used to be. I think it used to be called a Hornblower. It's now Alcatraz Cruises.
Okay, Alcatraz, and that's Pier 39.
Yeah, so, Pier 31. People can go to alcatrazcruises.com, I believe it is, or org. Yeah. alcatrazcruises.org for tickets.
And Anton, one of the things that we want to remind people is that it's going to be during what San Francisco sponsors every year called the Fleet Week, which they bring in these massive weapons of mass destruction. They bring in a couple of destroyers, and then they bring in what they celebrate. Unbelievable. They celebrate while we're conducting spiritual ceremony for love and peace in the world. They're flying their most destructive jets called the Blue Angels. Blue Angels. Well, to Native peoples, Don, I think you'll agree with me, they're considered birds of prey. Massive destruction. And we're out there, doing ceremony to bring peace and healing and love to the earth and to peoples, while the government in San Francisco allows these birds of prey. And it's crazy. These are some of the most destructive jet fighters on earth. And they literally are going, hundreds, if not, 1,000 miles an hour, and they go under the Golden Gate Bridge. And while we're out there doing ceremony, they're flying over with their thunder. It's just unbelievable, disrespectful, and no sense of spirituality by the U.S. Armed Forces. And what they do out there, Fleet Week, is just flexing their muscle, letting Indigenous peoples know we're still have you under our cannons. We still have you, under our sights. And, if you look, while we're doing this on the rock, on on Alcatraz, there are hundreds of thousands of tourists, and if you look at the makeup of the crowd, it's a tourist gathering of probably 100,000, if not more, people celebrating these weapons of mass destruction. I consider it a slap in the face.
Well, and it's like an accident waiting to happen. You got these four jets roaring across the city and setting off alarms and shattering windows, and I don't see how the city can tolerate it. And thanks to the late Senator Dianne Feinstein, who introduced the military and the fleet, back in 1982, and they've been bringing their armaments. And back to 1990 and 1992, you might recall that it was Fleet Week. And so it wasn't just jets, but the military naval fleet was coming in. Think about it, 1992, for example, and we had the Peace Navy. Everybody in the Bay Area who had a boat, who had a yacht, who had a canoe, who had a kayak, was out there against these big ships. I don't know, people should look up, what I'm talking about.
Don, we were there.
Photos.
I was there.
You were there, of course.
We jumped on one of those little boats, and we actually went as close as we could get to one of those massive destroyers, that came in. And I had Willie Lone Wolf on the little boat we were on, and we went probably within, I'd say, it seemed to me like a half a mile from the gigantic destroyer, and we had to pull back because the waves that the destroyer was causing as they were cutting into the bay was creating these waves that literally were about to wash us into the water. So we pulled back. But I remember myself, Willie Lone Wolf, and Anton Lorigo got on this little boat from one of the captains of the little Peace Navy to confront the massive destroyer. Fortunately, nothing happened to us, and we were able to get back. We got completely soaked from the wave that hit us from the destroyer.
Yes, I mean, there's no doubt there was a lot of activism, and it had to be that way to be catalytic in raising consciousness. To where now Indigenous Peoples Day, for example, is accepted. Columbus is in the dark corner now. Anytime he pops up, people fire away. But in terms of the Peace Navy, I have to commend the Bay Area people at that time, 1992, that were out there, with the U.S. Navy fleet coming in, and I mean, just heroic to see these little ships, yachts, and boats, getting in their way. And you don't see that fleet coming in anymore like that. You know what I mean?
No, you don't.
And thanks to KPFA Radio, put the word out, and the voices from the ground up are given the opportunity to voice concerns and issues, and changing the course of history.
That has been really great, guys. You guys covered so much. I really learned a lot. One question I want to ask to see if you can maybe go off on, because Alcatraz, the sunrise ceremony takes place on Alcatraz Island, out there in the middle. What maybe are some type of technological issues or other just issues that you've had making sure that the broadcast goes through every year and such?
Well, if I may, Miguel, because I know you got a whole story behind that. But I'll tell you this, mikO, when we used to go there, and with microphones and speakers, I mean, we're talking about in the 90s, the speakers that we had to haul, we had to push them onto the boat, and wires, and Ernie Rivera of Somart, the south of Market Cultural Community Center there, Somart, Ernie Rivera, and the people from there always provided that support, and they would bring their speakers, their wiring, and we would help them push those speakers onto the boats. And now today, fast forward 2024, the speakers and the gadgets that go with the microphones, you can carry them in your hand. It's the technology now.
Yeah, it really has changed. It's made it, we used to take a whole cart, 3 duffel bags, 4 big boxes of wires and cables. And it was, it would fill up a little small truck. Now we got a couple of computers, we got smartphones, and even my flip phone becomes a microphone. No, we've learned how to do this. It has been a challenge throughout the years, but I think the biggest challenge was when the pandemic hit. It kind of closed everything down. We had issues with that. And for some reason, when that happened, the military came in and through the, because it's a federal park. The military feds came in, and they changed the whole the way they communicate from the rock. It got completely changed. We used to be able to patch into their system and then go directly to here to Berkeley, but that changed, and that has been a challenge for us. But again, we have a heck of a team that we bring out there. We have Falcon, we've got Frank Sterling, Pedro Reyes, who are all engineers, and also Sara Blanco, who helps produce that particular those broadcasts from the rock. And just to clarify for people, they call it Alcatraz Island. It's not an island; it's a massive rock. And there are trees out there, there are flowers, plants, bushes. Well, that all happened when they brought dirt on barges back at the turn of the century to be able to plant stuff, because there was nothing there. Alcatraz means pelican. That used to be a nesting ground for pelicans, in their flight and when they come to give, lay their eggs and hatch. That's why when we go out there every year, we go out there a day or two before to make sure that they clean everything up, that they water everything down, because it can be a real seagull mess out there. And, again, every year it's a challenge, but we have an incredible tech team and then the support here at the station to make this happen. So that's why it's become a tradition for us here at KPFA to do this as part of bringing information, educating people, and bringing a sense of spirituality to help folks not only with their inner self, but mentally empower them. And that's why we do Radio Free Alcatraz.
All right, guys, then I want to ask you, what's the future? What do you see for the sunrise ceremony as it moves forward to the next generation and evolves here at the station? How do you want to see it grow? Where do you want to see it? Tell me how you see the broadcast continuing on.
Well, one thing that we've done, myself, Tone, and others, is we've trained a whole generation to replace us because now, we're OGs. And, it sometimes is a struggle even walking up there to the place where we gather up at the yard, because it's a cobblestone kind of a long, incline upwards, and then we have to make a couple of Z's before we get to the top. But that said, as OGs, we know the significance and importance, and that's why KPFA, when I'm done, we're done, Tone, when we drop and we can't get up anymore, there's a team that's all ready to go. We've cultivated that crew called Radio Free Alcatraz, which again is Falcon, is Sara Blanco, Frank Sterling, Pedro Reyes, Daniel Rodriguez, Francisco Herrera, Janine Antoine. These are all, well, with the exception of Janine and Francisco, everybody's under 40. So when we can't do this anymore, the tradition here to bring a direct line from the indigenous native communities of Northern California and the country, because people come from all over the country, indigenous nations, to be part of this. So it's going to continue. When I can't do it, when you can't do it, Don, we got another crew that's going to continue it for another 30, 40 years.
Yeah, no, that's right. Meanwhile, the ceremonies, the conduct of the crowd, both October and November, as we've said, is spiritual, and people come from everywhere. Indian people from throughout the Americas and Oceania, Hawaii, Tahiti, Taiwan. They come from Africa, and they're given some of the people. It's coordinated by the International Indian Treaty Council. They're the host there, and they select certain key speakers and international singers who bring their culture and share and pray in their way with us in those circles at the island. So I think that will continue. As far as the island itself goes, from the occupation of November, there's certain goals that still haven't been met, and one of which is a cultural center there on the island, which is yet to be discussed and determined by the national park there. But it's a beginning of providing like a cultural center and a museum of sorts of artifacts from the occupation and all through the decades being at Alcatraz. So hopefully that will come to bear, and that's also one of the items or that cultural center has been talked about by the renowned author Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz herself, and I heard her talk about that also on KPFA Radio.
This has been great, guys. I think we've got so much information here. I know that I'm going to have a couple more interviews with Bill Means, and then Lakota, hopefully. And as we work to put this together to make a really great broadcast for Unthanksgiving, the goal again to play it about 6 p.m. I just want to know, are there
for Unthanksgiving or for October?
We're taking notes but we're going to play this broadcast. This special broadcast is for the 6 p.m. slot on Unthanksgiving in November. So we're getting started early because I want to gather as much information as I can about this.
Okay, because the November is a different story itself and the occupation.
Oh, please tell me about how November is different.
Well, that's a whole other story. Maybe Lakota and Bill Means can share that aspect.
Yes, they can.
Okay, I think that sounds great. Then I would say, is there anything else you want to tell me about the sunrise ceremony, your experiences there, what you hope for it, what it's done for you, what do you think it's doing for the station? Just go ahead and close us out.
Well, I would say try to make October a family affair. Bring families, relatives, as many people close to you as you can. And by the way, don't forget, October 12th, it's Saturday, October 12th, is the 32nd annual Berkeley Powwow, which I talked about earlier, that shares pretty much a part of our presence beginning there at Alcatraz for October. And one of the things that bloomed is Indigenous Peoples Day Powwow. So that will be in Berkeley Saturday, October 12th from 11 to 6 p.m. And it's right there on Martin Luther King, right across from City Hall.
KPFA Radio is a community-powered, listener-supported radio station based in Berkeley, California. We are able to bring you this content through donations and support from our listeners. Please consider supporting KPFA through a donation by visiting www.kpfa.org/donate. And now let's get back to the program. You're listening to the Unthanksgiving Holiday Hijack. My final interview is with Morning Star Gali, one of the main organizers of the gathering. She spoke of the logistical needs to put on the gathering twice a year.
My name is Morning Star Gali. I am a member of the Achumawi Band of the Pit River Tribe. Pit River is located northeast of Mount Shasta in the four-county area of Shasta, Lassa, Modoc, and Siskiyou counties, which is known as the 100-mile square. For the past 16 years, I have been the lead coordinator for the International Indian Treaty Council's annual Sunrise Gatherings that take place in both October and November for Indigenous Peoples Day and Indigenous Peoples Thanksgiving. I have been serving as the California Tribal and Community Liaison for the past 16 years. But prior to that, I was actually born at the AIM House, the Aim for Freedom Survival School in Oakland, California, back in 1979. That school was led, the survival school was led by Bill Wapapaw. And the AIM House, actually, the founder of the AIM House, Bill Wapapaw, he also founded the International Indian Treaty Council office in San Francisco. And so there's a long time history of Native community organizing with our local Bay Area Indian community. There's also a family legacy for many of our families that are still very active in organizing within our communities. And so the Alcatraz Sunrise Gathering is really a continuation of that. As a small child, I was taken to the Sunrise. I was brought to the Sunrise Gatherings when it was really just a small group of anywhere from 25 to 30 people, many extended family members of the American Indian movement and women of all red nations. And we would only be on one ferry boat. We would gather together on the island, offer those prayers, have ceremony, greet the sun. And so here we are today in November, on November 28th, for the annual Sunrise Gathering for Indigenous Peoples Thanksgiving, where we are gathering with over 5,000 people, and even more, many thousands will hear the broadcast here on KPFA through Radio Free Alcatraz, the Sunrise Gathering, as an homage that is paid to the Alcatraz occupation of 1969 to 1971, the month-long occupation that many of our family members, extended family members, educators were participating in for those 19 months. They went on to work at a school that was developed on the island, the Little Red Schoolhouse. That school still exists today, and that is known as Hintel-Kuka. That is in Oakland, California. It's the only Native American Child Development Center that still exists today. So I was raised with the understanding of our history as Native peoples, and understanding of what relocation and termination meant as it was lived within our communities. Those definitions, we we're actually living that on a daily basis in terms of the impacts of those federal Indian laws and policies of terminating the reservation systems throughout the country. And so as many families of the relocation era, as many families that were both relocated and moved due to economic hardships and circumstances. I was raised in the Bay Area Indian community, really fortunate to be immersed in local tribal traditions and cultural gatherings and teachings through the Intertribal Friendship House, through many events that took place at La Peña. And so, something that I really think back to is those prayers and those messages that were offered all those years ago, over 45 years ago now, in terms of really shifting the narrative of telling the truth and history of our true history as California Indian peoples, of what happened to us as Indian peoples, of dispelling the myth of colonizers in holidays that we no longer celebrate as these colonizer holidays. Those were prayers that were made on the island over 40 years ago. I was a part of those prayers as a young child. And so here we are today, gathered together with relatives of Indigenous peoples from all four directions, from, the many rich countries that are celebrating Indigenous heritage and celebrating our current struggles and the resistance to ongoing colonialism, the resistance to capitalism and white supremacy. And so we will be there in solidarity. We will be there in the spirit of resistance, calling still for the freedom of Leonard Peltier, calling for justice for missing and murdered Indigenous peoples, and really standing in solidarity, especially at this time with our Palestinian relatives, with the genocide that we are all witnessing and have been witnessing for over a year now. I want to share a little bit about my role as an organizer with the Sunrise Gathering. As I mentioned, I've been coordinating this for the past 16 years. And so that has been through the office, the San Francisco office of the IITC, International Indian Treaty Council. There's really just less than a handful of us that coordinate this gathering for over 5,000 people. And so we have 2 part-time staff that are in the San Francisco office. And, we really work hard to ensure that everyone shows up and has, a really beautiful experience. We understand the sacrifices that are made in terms of family and time commitments, to be there on the island, to be at the pier at 3:00 a.m., ensuring that everybody's boarding the boats safely. We have really great security and safety teams, and we have a live 3-hour program that culminates at the end with breakfast that is offered. We're really grateful to the Know Your Rights camp that was founded by Colin Kaepernick over the past number of years now. Breakfast is provided by his team, and we use a local Indigenous kitchen through Wapapa's Kitchen, the restaurant that is located at Fruitvale BART Station over in Oakland, California, and they just celebrated 3 years of being open. And we're really grateful for all of the partnerships. Crystal has a really beautiful story that she shares about how she attended Sunrise Gathering as a young child herself, and everyone was going out to eat, and she was confused as to why there wasn't an option for a Native American restaurant, why we weren't going to a Native restaurant to go eat. And so she really carries those traditions of her late uncle, Bill Wapapa, through her prayers and her offerings to the community in providing traditional foods and really promoting and asserting food sovereignty through her cooking and the really amazing dishes that she provides through Wapapa's Kitchen. And so that's a important component to include as well, that this is very much community-led, community-driven in terms of all the community offerings that will take place on that day.
Wow, that was great. The part where you told me that you really are only like a handful of people putting together this gathering that now sees like it's grown to like 4,000 or 5,000 people. That actually made the hair stand up on my arms. So that was really great to hear it. Can you tell me more about like what it takes to actually put the actual ceremony, doing the ceremony? I know that you guys bring in different speakers and guests. What does it take to contact the relationships maybe that you have to cultivate through that you've built over the years, please?
Absolutely. Yeah, there really is only about 1.5 to 2 of us as staff that take this project on, and it's a few months of really dedicated planning. We are up from 5 a.m. to midnight sometimes in terms of lots and lots of logistics to coordinate. We bring together dance groups, Round Valley dancers and Yuki resistance dancers travel over 3.5 hours from Round Valley, California, from Coblo, California. And we have dancers. We had over 100 dancers that were there for the October gathering. And so we have Yuki resistance, Round Valley. We'll have Shingle Springs that are traveling over from Placer County, from Shingle Springs, California. And so our dance groups are there to offer their prayers. Many of them have danced for many decades and many generations even. I danced out on the island as a small child myself. My daughter now dances. My youngest daughter is out there dancing on the island. And so it's just, again, really, in the way that it centers our ceremonial commitments, and in the way that it centers the prayer for all of us and the healing that is needed for all of us, especially on a day that represents so much, that it's a representation of American values that do not align with ours. And so to be in ceremony and to be in community with people, I will say that is very much one of our offerings in terms of the organizing and in terms of the coordination. Rochelle Diver has been coordinating with me for over the past 10 years. She leads up the environmental health program for International Indian Treaty Council. So a lot of her time is spent traveling to the United Nations and in lots of UN preparatory meetings and negotiation meetings. She's spending anywhere from 12 to 15-hour days, but is still supporting with the permitting and the liaison that is needed between National Park Service, between Alcatraz Cruises, and then between our San Francisco office. She really handles the permitting aspect of it. And then for myself as a lead coordinator, a lot of my involvement is really in coordinating the agenda in terms of bringing speakers and dancers and dance groups and artists, and they travel from all over the country. They travel from around the world, and we really do our best to have a representation of the many faces of Indigenous peoples and Indigenous peoples' struggles from all over the world, and the recognition of international Indigenous rights and recognition of international Indigenous solidarity with all peoples that are, here, still alive, still today, still thriving, and still maintaining their cultural practices, and also maintaining resistance against fascist regimes, mainly that of the United States government. And so, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of coordination. I actually received my name, Morningstar, during a sunrise gathering that took place there at the AIM House. And so, have just really kind of accepted my role and responsibility in this, and continuing on the gathering for our future generations, for our children, and understand that those prayers that were made over 40 years ago, we are very much living that today. That, it's small steps forward, but we very much have the visibility to bring attention to our issues. We very much, are fulfilling those prayers in terms of our ongoing resistance and ongoing solidarity. And so it has a really deep spiritual meaning in terms of what the day, what the moment, what all of the organizing represents, and bringing that attention and awareness to who we are as Indigenous peoples. And we come together in that way. And it's always a really beautiful gathering. And it really is, I see it as a way of answering many of the prayers that are made throughout the year. There's elders that have joined us, in many years past that are not going to be there with us in person. And so we honor them as well. We pay that respect that there have been a lot of losses within our community and lots of transitions of our loved ones passing away, especially during this time of year. And so really, making those tobacco offerings to the fire, saying those prayers as we greet the sun with 5,000 people all facing towards the east, greeting the sun and making those prayer songs and prayer offerings on this day.
Wow, yeah, that is a lot. I actually that's opened up a whole world of like three other like questions. First of all, I love that that's the origins of your name. It brings it together so much more for me. I first want to start by asking. I spoke with Miguel, and he was telling me how you guys go the day before, and you just kind of clean up the space, just to make sure that the area is clear and good, because you do have dancers out there. You're telling me that your own child goes out there to dance. I'm seeing it for myself. You guys are barefoot. You totally brave the cold. Can you tell me a little bit about the preparation of the space itself, and even just like the setup and the breakdown and the cleanup?
Absolutely. Yeah, lots of preparations and lots of logistics that are taking place, as far back as July and August. And then as we lead up to, the day before the sunrise gatherings and the few days before, we have a team of volunteers that go out with IITC, and KPFA goes out to test, to ensure that the live broadcast, that everything that is, needed in terms of that to work. And there's 50 chairs that are set up so that elders have seating there. We do prioritize elders, and for folks that may be differently abled and may need chairs to sit down on. I always bring blankets and tarps to have a children's area. We want to ensure that our children are comfortable and not getting stepped on or not getting squished, which can easily happen when it's pitch dark out there. And so we have a little area that's set aside for our kids, and for anyone's children to be comfortable and to be able to see all of the dancers and, all that's taking place. And so we have a little, designated kids area, and we do our best to sweep the area, to sweep the inside circle out. There's lots of rocks that are up there on the parade grounds, in clearing out the area for the sacred fire that's put in the middle of the circle. my relatives drive over 4.5, 5 hours down with firewood from my traditional homelands from Pitt River. They have been bringing firewood down, a truckload of firewood for many years, so that we ensure that there's enough firewood that's there for the ceremony to take place. And so, yeah, lots and lots of logistical needs that include, distributing over 500 community tickets. That's definitely a task in itself to ensure that all of the dancers, all of the artists, all of the presenters and speakers, all of the Alcatraz veterans, that everyone, that may not be able, that the ticket cost may be a barrier, especially local community members. We work hard to fundraise and make sure that everyone's covered and distribute over 500 tickets throughout the community. And so we are there bright and early at 3 a.m. We have our little table set up with our International Indian Treaty Council staff and our staff from Indigenous Justice, which is the organization that I also lead. And we are there distributing tickets and ensuring that everyone, has enough light. We have our security teams that we ensure have lanterns and headlamps and flashlights. There was an issue with power this past time in October, and so we want to make sure that the walkways and the areas are lit so that nobody hurts themselves. And so we have security that is there not to yell at anyone or anything like that, but really just to make sure that everyone's safe. And so if you need a ride on the tram up to the island, then that is provided by the Alcatraz cruises. If if someone is needing a chair to sit in, if someone needs help in having a lit pathway, we have those volunteers, and it really is only 40 to 50 people that have volunteered to take that on. So again, for having those handful of staff and the volunteers, to be able to organize an event of this size, it really is. It takes a lot of heart, and it takes a lot of commitment to be able to continue this on over the years.
Yeah, just the logistics. You're telling me that you have family members who drive 4 or 5 hours for the firewood. I'm thinking of that drive. I'm thinking of chopping the firewood, loading it into the truck, driving the 4 or 5 hours, and then next for me, how did you get all that firewood? Because there's a bunch onto Alcatraz Island. You got to ship that over on the boats. That, yes, definitely so much to know there. That's I'm just picturing
and then
it.
With the loading, there's lots of loading of items, and so the sound system goes the day before. Any equipment, we have canopies for the dancers to be able to change in, and and have a little privacy to be able for their dressing. So we have canopies set up. We have, we're ensuring that the firewood is unloaded from the trucks and loaded into bins, and then that's loaded onto the island and pushed up the hill. And a big piece of it for sure is just all of the community care and coordination. We're also supporting with logistics. And so for those relatives that are traveling from hours away, ensuring that everyone has a place to sleep, that they're not sleeping in their vehicles after, that long travel, and, doing our best to find them lodging, find community support, finding them places to stay and a hot meal. And it really can feel a little endless sometimes, but again, it's a commitment that we've made in ensuring that everyone is comfortable and everyone's cared for.
Definitely. And it's worth it to you for the passion that I can hear that you have for your community and just all that you put into this. My next thing is so you're saying you give out all these community tickets. And so I'm thinking that has to do with the Alcatraz cruises and the ferry boat over there. Now, when I was there for Indigenous Peoples Day, maybe it was you or somebody else mentioned that they were actually on strike and they came off of strike just for that day to be there for you guys.
Yes, there's been negotiations that have been taking place with Alcatraz Cruises, and it's not anything recent. It's been over the years, for sure. That we've always been in solidarity with the dock workers. We've always been in solidarity with the union workers, and so really having that worker solidarity. We had statements that were provided by the International Longshoremen's Union that were there, saying how much the Sunrise Gathering means to them. And I know that they've brought that forward in their negotiations. So part of our concerns that, we've brought forward is that through National Park Service, that Native American peoples should not have to pay an entrance fee for national parks, when we are engaged in ceremony, when we are taking place in cultural events and traditions, such as the annual Sunrise Gathering. We understand that there's a barrier to that with Alcatraz Cruises, in terms of the ferry boat, the ferry service over to the island, and that ticket prices have gone up in past years. But ticket prices have gone up without workers' pay increasing. And so we've written statements of support and have always been in solidarity. And that has been very much a reciprocal relationship with the workers and with the workers' union. Our director for International Indian Treaty Council, Andrea Carmen, shared a really moving story that her own father was a worker on Alcatraz at the Alcatraz loading docks. And so, he really instilled that within her of, not crossing the picket lines. And so there wasn't an active strike taking place at that time, but to share that we have always, been in support, and that the workers, while they were planning some of their strikes due to retaliation and to threats of violence that they were receiving, even in something as sensitive as that they were, in communication with us and letting us know that they would not be striking, during the Sunrise Gatherings. They would not be striking, at times that we were going out to the island. They were really strategic about keeping it to the weekend and really focusing on the tourists that were going out to the island, and that we were not being targeted in any way in that sense. And we really appreciate, the communication and the relationships. And, that's where our values lay, in a mutual way. And we will always continue to support one another. And hopefully, through the, whatever is happening behind the scenes with Alcatraz Cruises, they can really, be able to, it used to be one of the best, have some of the best benefits and for their workers. And unfortunately, that's really changed over the years. And so, that's part of our organizing and solidarity as well, to ensure that the workers are receiving just and equitable pay.
I love that. Hearing all that just lets me know how much this gathering has really touched the community, and people want to be a part of it and want to support you guys. Just everything that you're telling me, for me, just my own personal experience, again, really, I was only hearing the ceremony itself on the radio. So now just hearing all this behind the scenes, the history of it, just how it's growing, it's such a new world to me of just what's going on, beyond just those 3 hours that we hear on the radio. My next question to you is actually about the tobacco. Could you tell me more about where does that come from? Like, what that was my first time being there. So of course I was like, okay, here's the tobacco. I put it in the fire, offer a prayer. What really is it about, and where do you guys get it?
Sure. A lot of the tobacco is grown. So there's both grown and commercial tobacco. But all of the medicines that were there, the tobacco, the cedar, the sage, in California, we use a root, whether it's a bitter root, or some call it a bare root, that is burned. But there are offerings to the fire, and they pass the tobacco around as a way for everyone to make that offering. And it's really in that spirit of continued support and prayers and solidarity to keep the gathering going, to pray for ourselves, to pray for our loved ones, for those that are no longer here, and for our future generations. And so that offering that's made to the fire is a representation to that. The sage that's lit and the smudge that comes around, that's helping to just cleanse and helping to purify ourselves in that way. And so these are all traditional practices. They're going to vary by tribe, but those are all practices in terms of cleansing ourselves and making an offering to go with those prayers that are made for the morning of the gathering.
Okay, that's great. I think one of my final questions would be, so I didn't know about the events that happened afterwards at Yerba Buena Gardens. Could you tell me a little bit more about that, please?
Yes, so the Yerba Buena Gardens event has been taking place since 2019, and that is when San Francisco officially took on and adopted Indigenous Peoples Day in place of Columbus Day. And so we have a gathering with many of the same artists and dancers that are there on the island. And so for those that may not be able to make it to the island, at 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning to be able to board the boats, there is an event that takes place from 12 to 3 p.m. at Yerba Buena Gardens. And so it ends up being a pretty long day for us, but it's also really beautiful to gather together in that way. There's lots of local Native American and Indigenous vendors. There's lots of great, performances by the different artists and bands, and really just a way for us to celebrate, and acknowledge, the visibility of Native American peoples still very much here today, and celebrating our cultural traditions, celebrating who we are as Native peoples, and celebrating again our future generations, having our kids there, having them dance, and having them take part in all of the cultural events and gatherings that are taking place. It really is beautiful, and it really becomes a joyous celebration.
Yeah, okay. I think that's a lot of it. My last question to you is there something that you would want to definitely share, like maybe what your hopes are, your goals, how you would like things to expand, or just maybe just a personal comment or message or something you would want to try to share as I put this interview together?
Yeah, a personal reflection that I have to share is that, I think a lot about, that time of 40 plus years ago, and, many of our relatives that are no longer here, those prayers that were being made, those offerings that were being made, for better conditions for Native peoples. We are experiencing some of that today, but there's also many of us that are still, suffering. There's a lot of suffering that's still taking place within our tribal communities. And so to recognize that, the conditions that we still are continuing to live in when we are fighting for land back, when we are fighting for, the dam removals, when we are fighting for the return of the salmon, when we are fighting for, our ancestors that are being kept in University of California basements, stored away in cardboard boxes. These are very real issues that we are still continuing to fight for today. And so when we have speakers, that are really sharing, their personal experiences and what's on their heart, to listen to Native peoples, to, support in whatever way that you can, in that understanding that, we have survived, especially here in California, we've survived 2 waves of genocide. And, here we are still today, talking about how violence that is committed against the earth, that there's a relationship to violence that's committed against Indigenous women's bodies, that's committed against all women. And we see those effects today. We see how that's playing out today. And so, although, we come together in this way, that, it's important to remember that, we are still very much fighting for the protection of our sacred lands. We're fighting for the protection of our sacred waters, and that it really is going to take all of us in terms of being able to kind of withstand what is in our future. And so I know that there's been a lot of support through KPFA. My mom had a radio show called Living on Indian Time, and so I spent many of my childhood years there with her while she hosted that show on Friday evenings. But many of those issues that were being shared, and the education of what's happening to Native peoples is still very the same today. And so to pay attention to what's taking place and to continue to support in however you can with that.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate that you took out the time to do this interview. I'm really excited about putting this piece together. I definitely hope that you tune in 6 p.m. I hope that I do it justice. What, you, Tony, Bill, Miguel, you guys have said so much. So I can only use so much, but it really feels great. It's such an honor to be able to do this. And I really do appreciate you doing this for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your patience, and I'm glad it took place, and I'm glad you got all of the interviews that you did. That's great.
Yeah, I'm hoping we can save them, use them again, but for the most part, I hope that this really allows people to know more about the behind the scenes, so they can see so much goes into this. It's not just the gathering itself is great, the broadcast is great, but to know that all that it takes to put it on just makes it mean so much more.
Absolutely.
And there you have it, folks. The history of the sunrise gathering ceremonies broadcast from Alcatraz Island. I want to say thank you to my guests, Bill Means, Miguel Gavilan Molina, Tony Gonzales, and Morningstar Gali for allowing me to interview them. If you want to know more about the International Indian Treaty Council, visit iitc.org. My name is mikO Tolliver, and this has been your Unthanksgiving Holiday Hijack. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you want to find more KPFA radio content, log on to www.kpfa.org. Also follow us on social media by visiting Facebook at KPFA 94.1 and Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at KPFA Radio. Plus, check out our KPFA TV video content on YouTube and twitch.tv at KPFA Radio. Subscribe to this podcast and stay updated to when we release episodes of shows representing the best of KPFA Radio.